Well, let's begin. Welcome, everybody. Whether it's afternoon or morning for you, we're welcome. We're delighted you're joining us today for our webinar. Today, we're going to talk about research transformation for parent co-design, how parent partnership is shaping our research methods, results, and interpretation. We're really delighted that you're joining us for this conversation about the power of co-design and how parent partnership supports practice transformation in early childhood ecosystems. Together, we're going to learn how researchers, practitioners, and parents really work together to co-design the exciting new large-scale study of how parents view early relational health. That'll be followed by a panel conversation of question and then a question and answer between us. And then we'll then encourage you to join our conversation by putting your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat. My name is David Willis. I'm the founder and director of Nurture Connection, a national network and field catalyst promoting early relational health. I imagine most of you are familiar with early relational health, but to put it simply, early relational health is that state of emotional well-being that grows from positive connections between babies and their parents, caregivers, and surrounding community. Nurture Connection envisions a future where every family experiences the joy and benefits of strong, positive, and nurturing relationships. We do this by engaging a variety of voices and expertise, from parents and caregivers to doctors and doulas to policymakers and researchers. Let me reiterate that the through line of Nurture Connection believes in the value of centering parent partnership and involving parents in all things that we do. As we say, nothing about, as parents have taught us, nothing about us without us. And that sense of, from the Nurture Connection view, parents know what their needs are, they know their families, and we should be listening to them and helping design all things we do. Today's gathering is just another example of how we are working intentionally across networks to support the relational supports that advance the thriving and flourishing for young children, families, and communities through that power of connection and that of belonging. You can learn a lot more about Nurture Connection's work at our website, nurtureconnection.org, and be sure to sign up for our newsletter as we have ongoing learning and evolution of the field activities that are advancing this relational health frame. You're going to be hearing from a variety of perspectives today in this webinar, including parent leaders who've been involved in the co-design process of the research that you're going to be learning about. Stephen Thyberg is a parent leader on the Nurture Connection Steering Committee, along with two other parent leaders that ensure that the parent voice has shaped the work of Nurture Connection. We have two other parent leaders, Tiffany Solomon and Deepa Srinivasa Varadan, who also is a part of the team of parent leaders on the research team involved in the research design and implementation. And now I'm pleased too to introduce Adrienne Leveille, who's the leading researcher at the Center for Early Relational Health at Columbia. Let me turn to you, Adrienne.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Willis, for introducing this webinar. It really, truly is a pleasure to be here and to be joining you, and also to be joined later with parent leaders who co-designed this research with us. I am a research scientist at the Center for Early Relational Health at Columbia University, where I also lead the InSync Lab, which stands for Interpersonal Synchrony and Connection. And as an academic scientist and as someone who is also actually trained as a nurse, I really truly value the power of doing research in interdisciplinarity and in collaboration across disciplines and levels of experience. And I was actually reading a quote yesterday, which really spoke to me, that said that collaboration is not just about adding up everyone's expertise, but it's more about reorienting all of our roles, our communication strategies, and the decisions that we all make so that the team comes up with a product that none of us as the individuals or as the expertise that we represent could have been solved individually. And that is exactly what I hope the conversation today will be about. And so to do that, I'll be using the case of a qualitative study that was entirely co-designed by a team of parent leaders and researchers from here at the Center for Early Relational Health and from Reach Out and Read. And we will be discussing how this really close partnership and co-design was fundamental in shaping not only our methods, but also all the way to our results and how we are interpreting and even publishing the results. So to put all of this into context, this was a qualitative study in which we were interested in describing how parents from across the country describe their connection or their relationship that they're building with their young children. And this study came about because most relational health constructs, for example, I'm sure many of you have heard of attachment, sensitivity, or bonding. These are all constructs that have been derived directly from research observations. There's only been few qualitative studies where we directly ask parents how they describe this relationship building using terms that may be more parent-centered. There are some qualitative studies out there that have done answered similar questions, but there's limitations. Most of these studies focus mostly only on mothers, or they interview parents from what we call clinical samples. So for example, they'll interview parents who have a child that was born preterm. And the other limitation is that study populations are usually located in one place, typically around where the academic institution is situated. So for instance, in a college town or in a single city, for example. And so when you do it that way, you're losing parent voices really that represent parents from across the country. So here at the Center for Early Relational Health, we do both qualitative and quantitative research on the science of those early relationships. And when we first asked this question of how do parents from across the country describe their relationship or their connection with their children, we really wanted to make sure that we would be using best practices in qualitative research, but we also wanted to innovate in what is currently being done. So how did we do this? How do we innovate in qualitative research? We did this in two ways. The first way I already alluded to was that parent leaders were involved in designing every step of the research process, including from the design of the interview guide that they then use to conduct interview themselves with parents from their broader community. And so this is really what we refer to the co-design process that really was throughout the beginning to the end of the process. And here I just want to give a quick shout out to Dr. Nikki Sherman from Reach Out and Read, who really introduced me to this co-design principle and elevated the importance of this approach for this research. So our team included 6 parent leaders, 3 of which are joining this webinar today. And those parent leaders interviewed members of their own community for a total of 18 interviews. So parent leaders were involved in designing the questions, so the interview guide that they then asked those 18 parents that are part of their community. And if you're interested in that piece of co-design, there's been another webinar about a year ago that was more focused on this topic. And I think there should be a link to the recording that is shared with you in the chat if you're interested in reviewing that recording of that webinar. The second innovation is what we're going to talk more about in depth today. And that is how we adapted what we called member checking in a way that made sure that our analysis that we did here at the Center for Early Relational Health was really accurate to the parent leaders who led these interviews themselves. So first of all, what is member checking? Member checking is typically described as the process by which, after qualitative analysis, so after the research team has reviewed the transcripts from all the interviews and have identified common themes across these interviews, we would normally go back to the people that we talked to or that we interviewed and ask these people if the analysis seems right to them. So we would ask, does this sound like we got it according to your vision and what you shared in the interview? Or did we miss something, for example? And so here, rather than checking with the 18 parents that were interviewed, we rather checked with the 6 parent leaders who co-designed the study with us. Typically, we would return to the interviewees because the people doing the interview, so the interviewers, are normally researchers. So we took something that is normally best practice in qualitative research, but did it in a way that was specifically centered to the parent co-design process. And that way, we wanted to make sure that like I said earlier, that our analysis would really make sense to the parent leaders who had the experience of first designing the questions, but also the experience of asking the questions to other parents, and finally, also having the experience of being, of course, parents themselves. So specifically how that looked like for us after our first round of analysis that we did here at the Center for Early Relational Health, we met with the 6 parent leaders and presented them with the analysis. So with the common themes that we had identified as coming out of the transcript. And we asked them, does this sound like it's accurate to your vision of the interviews that you conducted, but also to your experience as being a parent yourself? So, okay, here we go. So this really make a big difference because academic research institutions tend to have very different demographics than the study participants that we study. And that's exactly what you see now on the screen. On the left, you see that our research team was composed mostly of women under the age of 30 who had no experience as being a parent, and most identified as white or Hispanic. And on the other hand, on the right of the screen, we really see that the power of this is that the parent leaders closely mirrored the parents that they interviewed, both in terms of their demographic makeup, but also in their experience of being a parent. So this is what the study timeline looked like. We first together co-designed the interview guide, came up with the questions that would then be asked to parents. Then parent leaders took this interview guide and interviewed parents from their communities. Then parent leaders even transcribed those interviews and made sure that they would be de-identified before they handed us over with those transcripts at the center. And then the team of researchers here used a software called the Zeus to do the qualitative analysis, which basically meant that we read the transcripts and identify common themes that came across those 18 interviews. And then once we were done with that, we met with the 6 parent leaders to present them with those themes that we had identified. And so this is what we initially had come up with in terms of common themes or organizing principles that were coming out of these interviews. And so I'll just read them through because it's important for you to then see how that changed thanks to the co-design process. So first, we had initially highlighted that parents generally describe their connection with their child as a feeling that is bigger than words. They describe that this connection is unique to each of their children, and that it also acts as a catalyst for their own growth and their self-discovery. And then we also identified some variation in when parents describe the onset of this connection. So when it starts, but also what facilitated that connection. So when we first presented the parent leaders with these with these themes, there's 2 important limitations that were immediately striking to them. The first one was that we were focusing on the pretty description of the connection. So we had pulled all the really nice, beautiful language that parents used when they described their connection with their child. So for example, as feeling like the sun rising in the sky for the first time. The other main limitation or piece that was really standing out to the parent leaders was that we had not considered what parents said about how they view their past as influencing the current relationship they are building with their child, and the impact of all of the cultural, familial, and intergenerational factors that play a role in this connection. And this was really interesting to us because the parent leaders were exactly right in that the interview guide actually was composed of 4 big sections. The first one was about asking parents to describe their childhood relationships with their primary caregiver. The second section of the interview was about describing their current relationships, but with other adults. And the third, I'm just realizing all of these sections are numbered as one, but the third section in blue is the section where we were asking parents to describe their relationship with their youngest child currently. And then we had a brief demographic questions to have an idea of the demographic makeup of the parents that participated. And in our researcher brains, it initially made sense to focus on that third section of the interview only because we were interested in answering the question of how parents describe their relationship. And so it only made sense to us to focus on that specific section of the interview. Sorry. And so based on the feedback and the input from the parent leaders, we actually decided to redo the entire analysis. So the research team went back to the analysis, went back to consider the whole transcript of the whole interview, and completely reanalyzed the common themes. So after this reanalysis, this is what the final organizing principles look like. So the first principle that we identified is that parent-child connection begins first with an instinctual sense of responsibility that is there even before that connection happens. From this foundation, the connection builds as a dynamic process over time that also ebbs and flows. And there's family circumstances that directly shape this connection. We also pointed out that parents' own upbringing and past relationships indirectly shape how they connect with their child. And for a connection to grow, parents must show up both physically and emotionally, even when they identify other demands competing for their attention. And finally, the sixth principle is that over time, parents grow from parenting, and that growth feeds back into that connection. So overall, this is what our final study timeline looked like. And if it had not been for the really powerful input from the parent leaders after this first member checking, these 2 steps would not have been done. And so now we've gone through a second member checking where we fine-tuned these 6 principles that I just described. And now we're actually at the stage of publishing these results together. And this manuscript should actually be available very soon and should be linked in the show notes in the recording of this webinar and shared in the Nurture Connection newsletter for those of you who would like to read more about the study. And so before I open up for the discussion with the 3 parent leaders who will join me in a minute, I really wanted to take a minute to reiterate that this co-design process went above and beyond just getting input from parents. The co-design process really shaped the full spectrum of the research process, which made a clear difference and fundamental difference in how we interpreted and presented the results ultimately. I also wanted to share that my favorite finding is the last principle that led us to actually identify a new construct that we together coined relational legacy. And so anchored in parent voices, relational legacy has to do with the idea that parents have agency in what they choose to carry forward from the past to the relationship they are currently building with their child. and how this creates a cycle helping parents to grow and better themselves, which again feeds back into the relationship. And so this is not just about breaking cycles. It's not just about reflective functioning, but it's more about the agency over this cycle and how the growth continuously feeds back into the relationship. And I wanted to share this because, and I said it's my favorite finding because it's the perfect illustration of why the co-design process was really important and how important it is to carry forward. Because without the process that we have gone through, and the humility to collaborate and join expertise, we would have entirely missed that finding, which now actually opens the door to many more questions about how we talked about relationship and relational health with parents and how we measure relational health, et cetera. And this is, to me, really the essence of collaborative research, and why I believe it should be the reason why we choose to. I will choose to carry forward this framework in my research. And so I believe, yeah. And so with that, I would like to invite Dr. Willis and the parent leaders and open up
Great,
for
great.
for discussion.
Adriana, that was phenomenal and inspiring and also reflective of bye-bye, saying goodbye to my cute little granddaughters who are visiting. So I'm delighted that we can have a parent partnership to have a conversation. And I was commenting to myself, Adriana, as I was listening, the wisdom that gets captured with families that can be shared with all of us, that's sometimes harder to see. And I love the concept of relational legacy as being really incredibly striking. And also it captures generational wisdom. It also
Mm-hmm,
captures the sense that relationships, is a relational journey of growth. And it has a life course kind of element. It's evolving
mm-hmm,
continuously rather than a fixed state. So I'm delighted
right.
to that. So let me, first, I want to ask each, we have our three parent leaders that I've previously introduced. We have Tiffany Solomon as a parent leader with Reach Out and Read, and Deepa, who's a parent leader likewise as a panelist, and then Stephen, who's been a part of our Family Network Collaborative. But let me first ask each of you, reflect with me of how did you come to this work? How did you come to be here in this project? What jumped out to you as to why you accepted to be a part of it? So who'd like to go first?
Well, I'll get us started. I have three amazingly brilliant, each in their own right, children. My oldest is 19, my middle is 16 years old, and my youngest is 9. And when my youngest was born, he was born with medical complexities. And I remember trying to navigate all of these systems of healthcare that, we previously didn't have issues navigating, and coming to the realization that my understanding of child development and my capacity to be a great caregiver was being challenged. And when my son was 2, we became homeless, and during that time frame, and shortly thereafter, we were asked to share, about our experiences of the healthcare system, navigating that, about childcare development. And that led me to some conversations in the early relational health space, with the privilege of learning to become a parent leader and then learning to become a parent researcher. So that's how I get here today.
Thanks, Tiffany. And we're delighted you're a part of this journey with us, with the authentic stories that matter to all of us and the heart and soul of what you bring. Stephen or Deepa next?
Yeah, I'm happy to go. So, yeah, for me, it's been a journey. I think about I always in these spaces reflect on, what got me here and involved in this space. And so I went through a really rough custody battle when my son was 5 months old. He's now 5.5. So 5 years ago. It's flown by, but ultimately, I went through a really traumatic time, faced a lot of adversity, got treated poorly by the family law system here in Washington State, and really, it was interesting because I felt like I was being treated like a bad guy or a bad person, all because I wanted half custody of my child, and I thought, this is really wrong. I'm just trying to show up for my child. So why are they making this process so hard? And so going through that process, I really started to understand the challenges that many fathers face, especially when they separate from, their co-creator, right? And so realizing that, it takes a lot of financial resources and mental fortitude and emotional resilience to get through that process, and that unfortunately, not every dad is able to fight that battle. And so for me, that really sparked something inside of me, a passion for me, you could say, to just do what I can to try and help dads and try to make things better. And ultimately, part of that combined with, right, learning how to do it all from the time my son was 5 months old, and even before that, reading books to be the best dad that I could be, show up in ways that were different, right, like emotionally and developmentally than my own father was. That really inspired me to, and why it was like a perfect marriage when this relationship with and this opportunity with Nurture Connection Early Relational Health opened up, because I was already embodying so much of that without even knowing that it was early relational health. And so to be able to promote such a powerful and fulfilling movement made a lot of sense to me. And in terms of, being part of the Family Network Collaborative from the inception, being part of the steering committee from the inception, has been just a wonderful journey to watch the evolution. And for me, always hearing about the research stuff, I think I got involved on like the second project, right? And for me, it's really an amazing experience, because to me, like, research is how we really, that's like the ultimate validation in the field, right? That's kind of like the show and prove, right? So yeah, that's what brought me here today.
And you embody that sense of a relational legacy and growth. So and we're delighted you're along this journey with us too. And Deepa, for you, please, what drew you here?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm, similar to Tiffany and Stephen, my journey with my son when we moved to this country as an immigrant family from India. Those experiences really, shaped where I am today and what I'm doing today. Looking for resources and services to connect to for my son, who was diagnosed with to be on the autism spectrum, led me to connect with several different organizations within our state of New Jersey. And through all the opportunities I received, I started working at our parent center in our state. And through that work, I was connected with our early relational health champions and reach out and reach champions in our state, Dr. Manu Limanes and Dr. Usha Ramachandran, who really invited me to partner with them and participate in this co-design process with them, and gave me opportunities to participate in a community scientist program, etc., to build my knowledge. So always intrigued by research work and research projects, but having the opportunity to learn how to be part of it was really eye-opening. And then since then, I've worked with them, and they have been connecting me to all these various opportunities, and that's how I landed here today.
Fabulous. Always love the origin stories and the heart and soul of why you do the work and why you're a part of this journey. So let's talk about the discussion of your experiences with the research journey that Adrienne was speaking of. And let's talk first about what would you each describe as was the highlight of participating? Stephen, can I come to you first, and then we'll go to Deepa and then Tiffany.
Yeah, absolutely. So, really throughout the whole process was, it was really like fulfilling for me. It was a really fun process. I looked forward to doing the interviews. I think the biggest highlight though was really, like, obviously I interviewed fathers, right? And hearing from some of the fathers, right, the trauma of their own upbringing, and how they wanted to parent in a way that would give their children a better experience and a better upbringing, right? That was really inspiring for me, and resonated with my own experience. So just being able to really have that connection piece and connect into these relationships, and learn from these fathers, was the biggest highlight for me. So.
Mm, wonderful. Wonderful. Deepa?
For me, definitely the opportunity to interview parents from diverse backgrounds with diverse experiences, I think was the highlight. And also having the opportunity to be part of this research project from the very beginning, from co-designing the questions um, to creating or contributing to the creation of the interview protocols, to then identifying parents to participate in the interview, etc., was really a very meaningful process. And then to be able to ask those same questions that we co-created was very meaningful. And it really helped me get a deeper understanding of how childhood experiences and relationships of parents and caregivers can impact the relationship that they have with their children. I know we have all as parents probably experienced some of this, but to hear it from other parents and in their own words, and in all the different ways that those relationships and experiences have shaped how they parent, I think was really the highlight for me.
Amazing, Deepa. And Tiffany, for you, your view, please.
I would say really, first of all, it was cool to get to understand early relational health, particularly from a parent's perspective, and then to really get to learn what connection really meant, and how it varied between individual moms or caregivers. Also, being part of this project really helped me to discover more about myself, and I had an opportunity to grow as a caregiver individually, and that was meaningful for me.
We all get to grow and we share with other people and listen deeply. And that is a part of the journey, isn't it, as a parent leader, but also in the research journey, because we're learning collectively together around formed wonderings and curiosities and the like. So when the analysis that Andriana was talking about was brought back to you, I'm really wondering how you experienced that and what was that like when it was presented to you, what your feeling was about, oh my gosh, what we contributed and now what we're hearing. Tiffany, Stephen, can I ask you to go? And then Tiffany?
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah, so I mean, when the analysis was originally presented, it was just the essence didn't quite feel right. Like something felt a little off. And I think once one parent spoke up in the meeting, then everyone kind of started to speak up on certain aspects. Like, yeah, this didn't feel right. This didn't come off right, right? And that first meeting, we were really again only looking at the current. It was more focused on the current relationship of that parent and child, and the thing that really came out was, the parents felt strongly that the history of like our relationship with our own parents was deeply influential on the current relationship, as well as what we heard from the parents, right? I think a lot of us resonated with that and what we heard from the parents. And that was a really, key component that I think shaped the research. So it was really like through the healing of the past that allowed for growth to happen for a lot of the parents most of the parents that were interviewed. So
And that's very great. Stephen, it makes me think about that first person that broke through to trust to question. And maybe we can come back to that, but that's a very curious place because that was a significant moment in the evolution of your work. Tiffany, do you want to share what your thought was as this
Yeah.
material was presented to you?
Yeah, I might have been one of those first
Oh,
people that
oh, I didn't. Okay, that's good.
there were a couple of things that came up, and the first thing was, we had these top six things that were conveyed, right? And First and foremost, I remember that there was one phrase in there. One of the top things was that responsibility, I think it said, was
Mm,
foundational to establishing early connection or something like that. And I was like, responsibility? That had, it felt like it had a negative connotation to it. Like I remember thinking, It's not the response it's not like you're telling me I'm responsible for being a good parent. I had this instinct, and this instinctual sense of responsibility is what we kind of came to at the end. But I remember feeling some sort of a way about that, like Stephen was mentioning. And also, the emotional nature of the interview wasn't captured. These interviews were super emotional, and we weren't capturing the laughter and the tears that occurred during these conversations, especially as Stephen mentioned, in these emerging conversations about early childhood connections, with our families. So when the research team received this reflection and went back to reanalyze in the first section before caring for it, that was super, super impactful for me, as far as knowing that my work mattered, in this process.
What a beautiful statement. I like that Adrian took that and talked about pretty descriptions. And then you took it a greater
yes.
distance to talk about heartfelt experiences and
Hmm.
moments.
Hmm.
Right.
And that's really
Yeah.
striking to me too. Deepa, your thoughts about as an analysis was first brought and that process?
Yeah, it definitely took me a minute to reflect on the analysis that was presented to us. And I was actually framing some questions and thoughts in my head before I could speak up. And then when Tiffany, Stephen, and other parent leaders spoke up, I was encouraged to, say, hey, yes, I agree. This is how I feel, and was able to add to the discussion. But of all of these things, I think what stood out to me was how the research team reacted to our feedback. They were so thoughtful, and they did not make us feel for a minute that we didn't have to share our feedback or it was unnecessary or they weren't going to take it, right? So they were very receptive. They, were smiling till the end of the conversation, which was a great thing. And then they assured us that they were going to go back and start with the analysis all over again, which was really cool for me to witness and be a part of, because that really made me feel that this was a true co-design process in every sense. So it was such a meaningful process.
And that's so
And
striking to me. And Adrian, go ahead.
well, I was just going to add, and I'm over here laughing because I remember what we were thinking going into this meeting. And my team had worked so hard on these interviews, and qualitative, analysis requires a lot of time, a lot of reading and rereading. And we were confident that we had nailed it down, and we thought we were going to go into this meeting. And, what we would typically expect, the parents would have told us, oh yeah, this looks great. That's totally our ignorant thought that we had before. And so I'm so very thankful that we were able to create this, really team spirit and collaborative spirit that all of you felt comfortable sharing. You all were like, yeah, no, that's and after the meeting, I remember looking at my team and saying, yep, we got to do it all over again. We got it wrong. And that was just an incredible learning experience, both from a research perspective, but also a human to human, perspective, and how we can share our expertise and collaborate to really come up with something that's representative of all the voices.
Let's step back for a moment now, just for our last few reflections in this moment as you look back. That's been some months ago that this happened. What's it left you with? I mean, what's the larger meaning of having joined on? You each have your beliefs and what's valuable and important for you. You have your journeys. Then you've had this experience together as a research team and a parent partnership and generating this. What are you left with? what are you left with in the moment? Deepa, thoughts?
I think I'm just left with appreciation and gratefulness for the opportunity to co-design. And I think I'm also, um, you know, thinking about this authentic partnership um, and the true co-design experience. I think I'm really excited for all of this, and it's very meaningful, as I mentioned previously, because this is an opportunity to bring the voices of parents and caregivers from communities that may have been otherwise hard to reach or not be able to participate. So again, um, just lift the opportunity to be able to lift those parent voices is just really amazing.
The meaningfulness of contributing in this way has, for all of us, profound meaning and purpose. Tiffany, for you, and then I'll come to Adrienne, and then Stevie will come around. Tiffany, what are you
I
left
would
with?
I would say because the researchers really were so genuine in accepting, and I put a comment in the chat there. We knew you guys did hard work. Thank you so much for that. But there was also this space of trust and space of you know, genuine curiosity. Um, and then the response back about what we said was still very open. And like as far as the whole process was concerned, I think I've said this a couple times, but I kind of became this one woman band promoting research, you know, because we, as parent researchers, the six of us were personally valued in this research process. And so I felt like I was, and I still feel this way. I feel like I'm becoming a parent expert of these conversations. And that really
Mm.
gives me this space to kind of go and recruit and find these other parents and say, your voice matters. Here's why. I can show it to you. I can prove it to you. And there's that personal transformation for me.
Oh, I appreciate
Mm.
that. Makes me think about trust building and
Hmm.
authentic
Mm.
trust building for meaningful
Yeah,
purpose likewise. In
Hmm.
right.
tender areas where
Hmm.
trust really matters to get people to share true
Yeah.
experiences.
Yeah.
Adrienne, for you, what, as you step back, what does this mean to you?
Well, many things, but one thought that always comes to mind when we reflect on this process is that it's kind of scary to me how we could have missed all the nuances in the past and research that's been done without this co-design and bringing in the parent voices. And so, looking forward instead of backward, I really now even more so value the power of this collaboration going forward.
Nice. We'll talk a little bit further about looking ahead
Yeah.
in just a moment. But Stephen, for you, what's the meaning of this, your experience and participation in this effort to now?
Yeah, I think again, I think the biggest thing was just like how rewarding it was, like connecting with these parents and understanding them and their fathering journeys, like specific to these fathers, but really just like all the parents, right? Hearing about, all of the answers that came about. And I think, also like it was really a fun process and a really like I was excited for the meetings that we had to hear about the analysis, right, and to hear what like came of the interviews. So I was just left with as has been mentioned, a very cohesive collaborative process. And I think a big part of that is like having the right people in the room, right, like you mentioned, the trust and things like that. And I think that's too why I mean I can't getting to know Tiffany, last couple of years is like I don't think we're ever afraid to like to speak up if something doesn't feel right. But also like I also think that trusted relationships, right? Like having someone like Nikki, who I've worked with for years, right? That like I know that the people that she brought in are here for a reason and will be receptive to the feedback or what we're telling them. So, but yeah, no, it was an amazing process. I really I enjoyed it a ton. So.
Okay, so to the audience, we've shared this experience with you. And now let's start thinking about looking ahead. And Adrienne, let me come to you first. You've shared the importance of, engaging member checking, thinking about relational legacy, the co-development process, the experience of great meaning for you. And as we're looking at practice transformation
Hmm.
and about family of participation, and then we're talking specifically here about research agenda transformation by parent co-design with researchers along that journey. Um, what do you imagine is next? What have you learned, and how are you thinking about this moving forward in your work and your career emergence, and what's moving forward in your space? I'd be really curious.
Yeah. I have many thoughts, but as I kind of just alluded to, I think the main take-home message for me as an academic scientist is that, I've always been aware of the importance of co-designing research with what we call end users. In our case, it's parents. We learn it at school. Theoretically, it makes sense for most of us, right? But this was really for me my first opportunity to experience it, and I think there's nothing like experiencing it to really be convinced and carry it forward. And as I reflect on it, this was also, so I'm mostly a quantitative researcher, so this was one of my first experience with qualitative research as well. So I was kind of like learning at the same pace as everyone else. And I think, even speaking of shared expertise, I think some of the parent leaders even had more experience than me in leading these interviews, because some of them had experience doing this before. So I think the fact that for me it was a learning experience from a science perspective really um, maybe made me a little bit more humble, but that's really something that I think really kind of like changed my lens and how I view this the potential for the collaboration and the co-design. And so I really now even more so truly value and think this co-design across research study designs really should become the new standard to elevate the best practices, especially in relational health, because it's all about
Hmm.
relationships, human relationships,
Hmm.
which should be from, I think, the research process all the way to I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
the research building all the way to the
yeah.
results.
Well, Adrian, you're a trailblazer, and it's not easy. I mean, you've been able to, because of the commitment of your leadership and your funders and others, deeply value this being a critical element, but it has sustainability and budgetary impacts, it has workforce impacts, and it also has career building impacts for those parent leaders that want and wish
Mm.
to do more, and yet they have families to support and food to put on the table. And there are many barriers that make this work challenging. Yet, elevating that work, and we at Nurture Connections believe deeply in making it visible across the research communities to really the power of the opportunity. And we know we're confronting sustainability issues, funding structures, biases, misinterpretations, or simplicities of simple ways of gathering information that are not always authentic. So, but I'm curious, each of you, Stephen, your thoughts, Tiffany, Deepa, about, what's next? What's moving forward in your own thinking and guidance for those listening? Stephen, you first?
Yeah, I think that can have like multiple layers to it. I think just starting the conversation though, I think for me, looking ahead, it's really exciting the prospect of where this type of research can go, especially myself, hopefully continuing to be involved in it, but also just what's to come, right? I think a lot of us parents were saying, even in the planning for this webinar, of like, hey, let's do more of these. Are we gonna do more? Like this was such an amazing process. We'd love to be a part of future projects. So that's what really, like, looking ahead, that's like what really excites me, is to see where this research goes, because it just struck me as such such a unique way to conduct research, and I think we got some amazing results. So,
Tiffany, how about you?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question.
I know. Let's go for
I would
it.
say that this has allowed me to look at my journey individually because I've been in this space as this raw and green, kind of parent, not really knowing there's a proper term for things or a proper way to say things, and was given the opportunity to, kind of like do surveys or, just share feedback. And I've grown through some stages in this, and I've been at tables where it was a focus group, a more intensive experience of giving my feedback. I've been at tables where I've been a co-designer like this space and been able to support the work as a decision maker. And then I've been a parent leader or a leader of parent leaders. And so, one of the things for me is just elevating the different stages of parent involvement and being able to like this experience allowed me as a more seasoned parent leader to be involved, but then I was able to go and capture the voice and the feedback and the words of those other green or raw, kind of parent leaders, new caregivers, for instance. That's what I think is kind of in stages for me, is just continuing to push forward and elevate the different layers and different degrees that a parent voice can be uplifted, particularly in research spaces, so that we make those changes.
It's really excellent. As you saw, raw or green, I'd say living rooms of new
Living
families.
real, right, right.
And as
Yeah.
their stories are evolving, I mean, the experience of parents today is not the same experience of parents 3 years ago,
Exactly.
nor 10 years ago. And so to
Hmm.
capture the reality of the moment is really
So
valuable and critically
important.
important, especially in the birth to three, prenatal to three space, which
Hmm.
rapidly vanishes into school age. And so
Hmm.
paying very close attention is that opportunity. Deepa, how about you? How do you think about moving forward?
I've always advocated for parents to be part of all the tables, small and big decision-making tables, so the opportunity for them to be partners in research is something that is that I hadn't thought of previously, but now I can see how this is being possible. And so not only do I, as a parent leader, want to continue to do this and move forward with the next phase of this project or other future projects to see how, where this research goes, but I also want to support other parents from participating meaningfully in research projects, not just as participants, but as co-designers. So to that extent, our early relational health champion in our state, who invited me to participate in the community scientist program offered through Rutgers, I was one of the participants in the very first cohort that was offered. And so then he actually, Dr. Manuel Jimenez, invited me to co-design a revised curriculum for the community scientist program. So I'm super proud of these opportunities and all that's happening in this space to elevate parent experiences and parent voices. So really looking forward to where the parent movement will go and where this research work will go. So really looking forward to all of that.
Phenomenal. So, Adrian, what does it mean for the Center of Early Relational Health and the evolution of early relational health research? And how do you think about the structures, the challenges, the opportunities in the moment?
Yeah, well, first, I really wanted to take this opportunity to also elevate Nurture Connection as well as the partnership with Reach Out and Read and the structure you all have built in terms of the parent leader structure. And I really do think that the structure that has been created breaks the barriers, both for parents, but also for scientists to really get into this close collaboration effectively and in the right way. because I think as scientists, we sometimes want to create this collaboration, but we don't know where to start, or who to approach, or where do we find parents that want to hold this role. And so, yeah, the structure that has been created, I think, is really what makes a huge difference in this process. And we've had a conversation before where I forget, Stephen or Tiffany, you shared with me that the structure where parent leaders represent more parents of their communities also allows to elevate the voices of other parents that don't necessarily want to hold a role of a leader, right? And so I think from my perspective, and now that I've experienced it, I feel like it really is giving truly a voice to everyone in a way that is, meaningful, but also according to each of our levels of how comfortable we are with being involved with the research process, basically. So I didn't want to speak for both of you, but I remember you shared this with me, and I thought that was that really opened my lens. So that was really nice. In terms of future for the research, well, there's so many avenues, but there's big efforts right now in the field focused on how to, developing better or more methods to measure early relational health across sectors. And I think some of the results that that came out of this research, I think especially about this instinctual sense of responsibility. So that first theme that we ended up coming up with, I can't think of clear measurements of these constructs. And I think so that is, a clear future for this work would be to maybe think of how we can measure this, and ask parents where they're at in developing this sense of responsibility. And I think the other big piece for me and for the center is thinking of better ways that we talk about relational health and how we, again, measure or study relational health in ways that we're not just talking about attachment, and we're not just talking about these constructs that are super researcher based and aren't necessarily anchored in parent voices. And so thinking of not necessarily new or other constructs, while maybe that may be, but also just talking about relational health in a way that is meaningful to parents, I think will make bigger impacts on the research that we do.
It's going to be fascinating and delighted to watch the evolution of this work and the discoveries along that journey between parent wisdom and questions and wondering and experiences and what we can witness and learn together along this collective journey. For those of you, Adrienne was mentioning within Nurture Connection, what we call our family network collaborative structure. You can read about that on our website. We've had other webinars that speak of that. Adrienne, let me come to finish up just a couple, if you could give us what your takeaway of 2 or 3 key partnership principles that now are shaping your future agenda, please.
The first big one for me is I think partnership should really challenge our assumptions as scientists, not just validate them. And this is what I meant earlier when I shared that we were kind of expecting to be validated when we presented our results to the parents. And the fact that we were challenged is really what pushed us. And so both in qualitative or quantitative research, I think continuing to, this collaboration to being challenged on what we think is right as researchers is a big one for me. The other principle or key partnership element that I take out of this is that lived experience and scientific training answer different questions, and they're not sufficient on their own. And it's the coming together that is really powerful. And I would say the last one is just to stay curious and lead with humility across, the research process to really learn from each other and grow together.
Certainly, as researchers, being curious and humble is a critical part of our learning journey. But as a parent, it's the same thing. To be curious, to be wondering, to be delighted, but also maintain that humility of learning journey that we're all on in our own personal growth. So I'm excited that in due time, Nurture Connection will have codified even a playbook around co-design activities around the FNC. So stay tuned for that in the next few months. And then Adrian, did you have anything that we should be mindful of that's emergent that you think is very cool that people might be interested in?
Yes, I think I can't tell if the screen is being shared, but we also wanted to give a big shout out to a PBS documentary for which we will share the link in the chat, I believe. And this documentary called Wired for Connection, which features Dr. Danny Demetriou, who's the director of the Center for Early Relational Health here at Columbia, who's was interviewed and in conversation about the science of human connection across the lifespan, which I've had the privilege of previewing it, and it's now been available on the PBS website since June 1st. Really amazing. Hope many of you can get a chance to view it as well.
Yes, I had the same chance and it's phenomenal. So I encourage people to
Yeah.
take a look if you're interested. So we're coming to the top of the hour, but we're going to stay on for the next 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers. And we welcome people to put either comments or questions into the chat, and we will begin to answer them as we can. And let's see what's starting to come forth. Any questions or comments that are jumping out in the chat that we should be mindful of? Question comes forth of, do the parent leaders have ideas about what is important for future research questions? Fabulous, fabulous question. What do you think, guys, gals?
One of the things that I think we've already elevated a few times in this conversation is how do you measure something like connection or responsibility in order to help me as a parent, a caregiver, or even a parent leader or a parent researcher. I think it's been importantly noted that we all can define those terms differently. And so I think, yeah, just kind of continuing to vet, the fact that there's a different glossary or a different definition for all of us. And I think that that's really important to be thinking about for future research is, how do we universally understand, some of these terms, and then, how does that translate when you're talking to different audiences of people, is whether it be the actual research angle or the presentation afterwards of the research or whatever that transformational stage that the information might be used for to help us as caregivers or parents. So being more specific there, I think, is important with those research endeavors.
Anyone else?
I would
Deepa
say,
or Stephen, thoughts about additional research questions?
Go ahead, Deepa.
thank you, Stephen. I was just going to say, whatever the questions, future questions, research questions you're coming up with, I think it would be important, especially after all the experiences that we have shared as parent leaders, it would be important for you to connect with parents and parent leaders to make sure that the research questions that you have come up with are meaningful for them and for the communities that you want to conduct the research in. So I would want to highlight that.
Yeah, I would just echo what both have said. I think I also think like doing these, I mean, literally the same questions, but with more parents, right? Just getting more of that, more quantity of that qualitative research just to see, I would imagine the findings would be the same, but or similar, right? But do we know that? And so, but like Tiffany said, I mean, I think also getting, thinking about what would be really interesting to learn about like that, because we did hear that in some of the some parents didn't resonate as much with the sense of responsibility finding, and some did. I mean, I was one that actually did. And so, I think again, you'll get a variance um, of resonance across the board depending on what questions you do go and ask. So I think, questions around connection and responsibility and things like that would be really interesting and a good way in, I think.
Fabulous. There's been a lot of activity in the chat from parent leaders with some technical questions. But one of the questions that specifically came for Tiffany from Monica Zena Martin. She asked specifically, you mentioned feeling personally valued. What were the behaviors or the actions or the tone or the style that demonstrated from Adriana and her team how you were personally valued, Deepa, Stephen, or others? How would you answer that? What was it they did that opened that space that you could feel as though you could share as you did?
I will say from the very beginning, the engagement with us was with clear understanding of every stage that we were going to go through with this research. In addition to the willingness to open up for questions. So when we had questions or concerns, from the very beginning, I think we all felt and understood that it was okay to convey, I don't know, like in a lot of other spaces, academic spaces or medical spaces, it can be very intimidating for a caregiver to hear these terms, and be like, what? And relational and health, I understand, but when you say them together, I feel like you're saying something different. And I don't want to sound stupid, so I think that there was that conveyance on the front end multiple times that please ask any questions. The other thing was before we met for meetings, for instance, some of the research, those themes were actually given to us in advance. And I think that that's one of the best things that you can do is allow caregivers or parent leaders the opportunity to see the research, see the information, preemptively, have a copy of the draft, for instance, so that they can do the work. We want to do the work. We want to understand, because most times it's for our children directly. So we're vested. But that was very meaningful. And then when we got to that meeting, I don't think any of us thought about the emotional element, for instance, not being there. I mean, and we kind of all were a blank slate at first. And then the team asked us, how are you feeling about this? And like, I really am feeling some way. And I'm glad you asked me that. I don't really know why I'm feeling this way, but I feel like there's things that are missing. And like, you didn't include the LOLs and the tears and the emotion of these interviews. And I think that, like you got to find a way to write that in, like I think
Yeah.
when we think about connection, you have to find a way to write it in because all of us said in almost all of our interviews that there was a high level of emotion. So those all gave me the sense of my value. And then the fact that the team reverse track, reanalyzed, and came back. I mean, you don't find the transparency in processes is clear to participants in the process, oftentimes. And so we got to see that bird's eye view, front end to back end. And then, of course, we're here on the very, very end of it, before the manuscript is printed as co-authors and also having the opportunity to continue to stay in the conversation about the research. So all of those are behaviors. I think I'm answering this question, but I'll throw it out to my team too to add into that.
Deepa or Stephen, what else would you say that you'd add that Adriana and the team did that allowed this element to grow?
I agree with Tiffany, all that Tiffany said. Plus, when they came back the second time with the analysis, they still did not say this is it. They still asked for our feedback, right? And, we shared our immediate thoughts during the meeting. And then they also gave us an additional opportunity to respond via a survey or a smart sheet form, whatever that we call that. So again, there was more time for reflection and processing and responding to some of those questions. So, which I felt was really meaningful and thoughtful. They really wanted our feedback. So that really made us feel really valued and connected with the work.
Steven,
I'm
anything
glad
to add?
I was just going to say, I'm glad you brought this up, Deepa, because that's a piece that I left out of the presentation earlier. But in addition to the meetings that we had together at the end, we put together a kind of like survey where we had the write up of these themes, and we asked you guys, how would you write this?
Right.
What words would you use? And then we ended up combining the parent, the parent voice, even in how we were framing these themes, which ended up in the manuscript. And the other aspect that I didn't mention now that I think of it, was super interesting to us, is that as part of this survey, we were trying to come up with which of these 6 themes were more important to the parents. And we asked you guys to rank them in order, hoping that you would all, again, come up with the same one that would be the most important. And it ended up being that it was all over the place. One was important for Deepa, another one was important for Steven, and there really wasn't any clear pattern, which now that we reflect on it, really kind of like was telling us that we had really captured the vision, of most people that were around the table. And it's not one person or one vision that's more important than the other, but it's everything coming together that really explains it all. So yeah, that was a really interesting process at the very end as well.
We have just a few more minutes before I'm going to ask each of you to just give some final thoughts. But just before that, there were a number of comments in the chat that were asking about how do you engage more parent leaders? What process does one utilize? How can you actually bring more parents into this kind of research? Any top of mind ideas? Tiffany, Stephen, Deepa?
Yeah, I think just I think, well, I mean, it depends, right? I think it depends on what parents you have I mean, it's all comes down to relationship, right? So how many parents does your organization interact with, right? Do you have parents that, come into your organization or that you're connected to that seem like they have a passion to get involved in more, right? Or do more, right? I think it's really has to be like from the ground up. I think, and this would be a great point. I was already thinking this of like when I saw all these questions, I'm like, well, this would be, a great opportunity to connect into Nurture Connections network of so many great parent leaders, many of us who've been doing this work for years and have, connected to other parent leaders in other spaces, right? So as David always says, like, I mean, and Bryn will always bring up, it's been around for a long time, but it seems like it's been very much more like emergent in the past, I would say maybe close to a decade. For me, I've been doing this for 5 years and even I've seen it grow a ton. So, but I think it all comes down to like starting with relationships and the connection that you have and engaging with organizations that are doing that have parent leaders that they're working with, but they're also engaging them in a meaningful, authentic way. Because one thing that we talk about as parent leaders is there is a lot of like inauthentic kind of tokenism in the space where organizations want to say they're working with parents, but it's not true authentic partnership or co-design, and the parents aren't really feeling like they're valued. They feel like it's more, one thing that we hear from parent leaders a lot that is that like things can feel transactional, right? So I think like having a mission, having a goal, and then like figuring out ways to continue to keep parents engaged in the work that you're planning to embark on. So,
Stephen, you've said it all. I know there's a lot more we could say, but we're finishing up, and I want to challenge both each of you, but I'm also going to say the same thing to all of you still listening in. And I'd like you to give one sentence as to what your takeaway is in this space. And we'll go around us as panelists, and then we're going to close out with each of you listening in to put in the chat, similarly, what's your take home? And we'll have that captured from all of us collectively. So, Adrienne, how about you first? What's your one sentence takeaway?
I think that I'll keep it as simple as this has been so much fun and I want to do it again. Research can sometimes be stressful and we get caught into our data and whatnot, but this has been such a rich and fun process. we've met several times, of course, over the process of the study, which has been going on for over a year now. And I think every time we have such rich and powerful meetings where we laugh and we share ideas. And so I think I just want to end on saying that, research is doing research together is so much fun, and let's do it again.
Beautiful. Deepa, your sentence?
I'll be a champion for the co-design process, promoting awareness everywhere about co-designing versus just consulting with parent leaders and soliciting their feedback. So thank you.
That's great. Wonderful, Deepa. And Tiffany, what's your take-home message?
Okay, David, I just have to say you're cheating me with this one sentence thing. I got to preface my one sentence by saying that I got to this space because one of the pediatricians on my son's team is a Reach Out and Read ambassador, and she recruited me and said, "Hey, there's this co-design thing that's happening. Would you like to participate?" Right? So I didn't get here through Nurture Connections, but I got here because, one of the ambassadors, in the pediatric space knew I would be a good champion. And so I would leave with that one sentence in that regard, and that would be start with your current parent ambassadors and use them to recruit more parents and caregivers in this space. It's really intimidating if you're the authoritarian, Tarian
Mm.
figure in these conversations in these spaces, and there's a level that a parent ambassador can weigh in on differently, and so I would leave with that.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Stephen, your take-home.
Yeah, I would just say excited to see where the research continues to go. Similar to Andrian, is just like it was really fun, and I'm excited to see, what the future holds. So,
Okay, so we're closing out, but as you are, as listeners, closing out also, having spent time with us, please put in the chat what your take-home message is, and we can all just take a moment and watch what comes forth as our way of continuing to leave and inspired by the contributions of what we just heard. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you for the team that helped put all this together. So share in the chat what your take-homes are, and we can all together just witness and see. It's fun to be able to read all of these.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you all. Don't sign up, please, for our Nurture Connection newsletter. Follow the conversations and the evolution of this amazing work. And again, thanks for joining us today. And there'll be a recording visible on our website shared out. Please share with other people to continue to help carry the message about the criticalness, the opportunity, and the fun, as Adrienne would say, of working in parent leadership together for discovery and field building and research and learning together from the wisdom of all. Thanks all.